Dead Space 2. This has to be one of the best Dead Space games in the franchise. I have played this game more times than I can count, and between this and the original Dead Space on the Xbox 360, I actually have gotten all of the achievements in Dead Space 2. And I believe I'm close with the original, but with the new remake out, it is kind of hard to go back and play the original game without playing the remake, which is just as good. But as for Dead Space 2, this would be the game to perfect the formula they put down in its predecessor. Not only did they bring in Gunnar Wright to do an amazing voiceover for Isaac Clarke, but they would add more features to this game to make it feel more fleshed out. And some people might say that Dead Space 2 might not even need a remake. But I think it deserves a remake at least, because look at the first remake, it's just absolutely incredible. And unfortunately, it's really up in the air whether or not we'll see a Dead Space remake, because EA pulled a serious kick the football Charlie Brown with the entire fan base. But let's take a walk, and let's talk about Dead Space 2. So the production for Dead Space 2 would start after the immediate success of Dead Space, and EA would during this time rebrand Redwood Studios to Visceral Games, who Visceral Games would start pitching new ideas for the sequel before landing on this story. Visceral Games would have a lot of free reign with this game, because EA saw how well games like Dante Inferno did, so the quality of their projects really spoke for themselves. The executive producer Steve Papausis said in an interview he noted that the team felt under pressure but described it as a self-imposed pressure to meet or surpass fan expectations and produce a quality project. Dead Space 2 would be made for the Xbox 360, PS3, and PC. They would actually start a Wii port, but that would be cancelled in 2011. There are different reports on what the game's budget was. Lead designer Zach Wilson reported a budget of $60 million and called Electronic Arts merciless with its allocation, while director Wright Bagwell described the budget as pretty small without specifying a figure. The production for Dead Space 2 took roughly 2.5 years before the game's development started, and when the game's development started, the team was around 150 people. The team actually started off small, and once the former game, Dante's Inferno, was finished, the team grew to 150 people. While many of the core staff remained, the creators of the game, Glenn Schofield and Michael Condrey, left Visceral to go start Sledgehammer Games, and thank God. I hate Glenn Schofield as much as I hate Todd Howard. I actually talked about Glenn Schofield and the Callisto Protocol in a previous video, and it's pretty great if you want to check it out. It just breaks down his history with the gaming industry. But the team's aim was to create a more polished version of Dead Space which would appeal to a larger audience. This included incorporating some action elements and making controlling Isaac much easier. The shift towards the action tone was described as a combination of the influence of new staff members and a wish to broaden the series' appeal and portray Isaac's character growth. Enemies were redesigned to accommodate the action elements, though the team also worked to maintain the horror elements and the atmosphere from the first game. The incorporation of cinematic set pieces were influenced by other popular games of the time, including Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. The area around the Ishimura was one of the first areas built, and they did this as a test so they could see how big the sprawl would actually be. When creating the cutscenes, most during chapters were done without hard cuts. Instead, they were merged into the gameplay. The motion capture for story sequences was supervised by Kate Latchford, who is the producer of the game. The scenes were first rehearsed and then shot with the actors in motion capture suits, and they shot with over 200 cameras to create a composite view of the characters during cutscenes. Gameplay elements were included based on the positive feedback from the first game. The main additions were the destructible environments, included to offer gameplay variety and increase the realism, and launching objects at enemies, which allowed for players to fight when they were out of ammunition. The team actually wanted each level to feel unique for players, with Paputis citing the level in a Unitologist church as an example of keeping the players on their toes. The Ishimura level had little to no enemy encounters to reinforce the tension and the game's themes. The art director, Ian Milham, successfully pushed back against requests to add more enemy encounters. and some of the puzzle and level designs were toned down for the final release after they got a lot of negative feedback from game testers about their difficulty. An early suggested concept was having Isaac voice suggestions if the players were struggling with a puzzle. The UI design was carried over from the original game, with some elements during the opening section tying into the portrayal of Isaac's mental state. Multiplayer would be one of those aspects that was requested by fans, and this was considered by the development team as they planned out Dead Space 2. And according to artist Ben Wannett, the incorporation of multiplayer was also done to appease EA, who had been pushing for a multiplayer component since the release of the first game so that they could broaden the series' market appeal. As a compromise, the team included it as an entirely separate game mode. The multiplayer section of the game started out with people asking what would make multiplayer stand out, and they chose a scenario with pitting a human team against necromorphs, and the team referenced other multiplayer games that included Call of Duty, Bioshock, and Uncharted, and Left 4 Dead actually. The team chose playable necromorph types based on their design, usability, and potential for players to enjoy. Story elements from the single-player campaign were incorporated into multiplayer, but not in a way that would spoil the story campaign for players who tried multiplayer first. Personally, I never got to play multiplayer, so I never got to see whether it was good or not. They recently actually just shut it down, which is a shame because I wanted to go play it for this video, hoping to get footage of it, but like I said, the online servers were shut down. When creating the story, Chuck Beaver acted as a story producer, as he did for the rest of the series. Beaver and Wannett together coordinated the lore with documentation to ensure continuity. The script was handled by television writer Jeremy Bernstein, who was brought on board through a chance conversation with one of the game's producers at a game developer conference. Anthony Johnson, who worked on Dead Space and expanded its media, jokingly described Bernstein as basically hustling the job out from under him. While Bernstein drafted the script, the story creation was a collaborative effort between Bernstein and multiple senior designers, as part of the wish to evolve the storytelling of the series. Isaac was changed from a silent protagonist as he was in the first game, and they would bring in Gunnar Wright to do the voice work for Isaac Clarke, which was a match made in heaven in terms of picking the right voice. They did that so Isaac would turn into a sympathetic character, and that the rest of the characters in the game could interact with him, and this would also show his independence compared to the first game, where he was generally following orders. They also wanted to balance his dialogue so that when he spoke, it wouldn't feel out of place. The story progression and dialogue would also show the change from Isaac becoming a victim to having a motivation because of his conflict with Tideman. The writer of the story describes Isaac's character following Dead Space as broken, as reflected in his actions and state of mind during Dead Space 2. And Isaac's mental illness was portrayed in-game through classic nursery rhymes, with a late-game scene involving Isaac using a needle probe in his eye, taking direct influence from the saying, "Cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye." And as part of the exploration of Isaac's mental state, Nicole was included as an illusory character, reflecting both Isaac's trauma and real-life situations where people lose loved ones. The questioning of Isaac's sanity and perception was reinforced using losing the hallucinations he experiences during the Ishimura level. A larger supporting cast was another early decision, with a large number of female characters described as a naturally emerging decision for the world design. Ellie was described by a staff member as the female interest for Isaac. During early production, Ellie was known as Rose, and Strauss was also created to communicate backstory to Isaac, acting as a possible vision of Isaac's future mental state, additionally playing into the I theme through his obsessions. During the script drafting, an extensive subplot surrounding Tideman was planned, as he was supposed to be an unwilling participant in the Marker project, and he would have suffered from marker-driven hallucinations involving survivors revealed to be long dead, giving his arc a tragic conclusion. This was seen as too sympathetic and left the game without a central villain, so he was rewritten as a more conventional bad guy. The team also expanded backstory elements that had only been roughly thought through to support the narrative of Dead Space. turning drafted backstory elements into a cohesive overarching narrative. As with the original, standard cutscenes were supplemented with audio calls between Isaac and other characters, and audio and text logs were found during exploration. The opening scene, which showed Franco being turned into a necromorph in front of Isaac, was created to set the tone for the game. For the scene, a model for Franco was built to be as anatomically correct as possible, with the death and transformation being as complex as possible. Unitology would also remain as a core part of the story, with the story director describing its portrayal as both a general commentary on how well organized religion and cults could cause harm, and adding the detail for players about its role in the game's universe. Another element that was given focus was the secret conflict between EarthGov and Unitology, which had only been hinted at in earlier parts of the game. And this became a main focus for the story design of the Sprawl. The team also denied that Scientology was the inspiration for Unitology, but we all know that that's not true. Ian Milham, the previous art director, would return to do the artwork for Dead Space 2. Milham wanted to stay away from traditional science fiction imagery, with the first year of development being dedicated to creating concept art for the Sprawl. When discussing the lighting, Milham said that he wanted to avoid the blue filter that James Cameron used for Terminator 2 and Alien, instead using darker lighting styles and color use associated with the work of David Fincher. They used player feedback and the new environment to create the Sprawl. The Sprawl was designed around the concept of an organically growing city with multiple residents and businesses, along with leisure spaces. The Sprawl design grew inspiration from interior design of the 1970s and 80s, with part of the horror base around the Necromorph's destructive presence. The Unitology Cathedral drew from the team's experience creating Gothic-style architecture for the Ishimura design, and additionally, they wanted to communicate the religion's beliefs and symbolism, including the marker symbol, which was modeled after a DNA strand. Bringing back the Ishimura was an idea that the team had had in the beginning, and it was also easier for them to do this because not only did it bring back older players, but it was a level that could be built using older assets and lower budget allocation. And a lot of the art team were new hires, and they were unfamiliar with the game and the technology that they were using. Isaac's default rig suit was designed to appear strong without taking away from Isaac's non-military background. The advanced rig suit followed the opposite design path, intending to evoke Isaac's growing combat ability against the necromorphs, and several suit designs reinforced the general aesthetic, but some were designed to have a more vintage look, including one of the suits that was based on a historic diving suit. The rig helmet was redesigned slightly so that it could realistically fold away to reveal his face for cutscenes and dialogue, while retaining its established shape. His weapons were all redesigned to have distinctive yet simple shapes, emulating the design of modern tools. The new necromorph designs, including the child necromorphs, were influenced by the new environment with the Sprawl. Several necromorph designs also served a gameplay purpose, allowing the developers to rely less on closed-room combat scenarios, and this would actually help out the pacing of the game. As well as with the first game, their designs were intended to be unsettling and unnatural, being frightening without being too conventionally monstrous. They wanted the trauma created by the transformations to play into the common fears people have around something happening to a body part, alongside like fractures and bodily warping being more realistic and disturbing than something like wounds from a laser gun. Besides for the returning necromorph designs, the art team would actually create new, larger versions that would be more realistically portrayed during their transformations than previous necromorphs. And they also wanted to make these necromorphs as normal, human-sized monsters. The disturbing behavior of the necromorphs and associated violence was something that the team paid attention to, and so it would become graphic and disturbing without becoming gratuitous.
There was a lot of work that went into this game, and the team wanted to make sure they made a game that was an upgrade from Dead Space, which was a hard task considering the previous game set a really high bar. Now let's talk about Dead Space 2's story, the release, fan reception, possible remake, should you play in 2024, and along with my final thoughts. So the story starts off with Isaac having a marker-induced hallucination where he sees Nicole while talking to his therapist. He is then freed from his cell by Franco, who is immediately infected by a necromorph, and after Isaac kicks off Franco, he will run to safety before being contacted by Dana, who claims that she can help Isaac stop the hallucinations. He just needs to make his way to her. Isaac then starts his journey running into Tideman's men, who are ordered to terminate him. After running and dodging Tideman's men, Isaac will see more hallucinations of Nicole before making his way to the lockdown point, where he runs into Nolan Strauss before Isaac gets locked in and has to fight necromorphs. After defeating them, Isaac escapes again to find out that the entire sprawl is infected, and he will run into Strauss again and notices his mental state is far worse than his, but Strauss also knows how to defeat the marker and destroy it. Isaac will make his way to the Unitology Church, where he finds out that Dana is a Unitologist who was sent to capture him. Right before she can do this though, she is killed by Tideman's forces, and Isaac will make his escape. After this, Isaac will find Ellie, who is also trying to make an escape. She leaves Isaac behind and then runs into Strauss. She reluctantly guards Strauss as they navigate the sprawl, fighting both necromorphs and Tideman's attempts to contain them. Isaac is regularly tormented by visions of Nicole, who keeps asking Isaac to make them whole. The group is trying to reach the government sector, but Tideman then cuts off the life support and forces Isaac to go up to the solar array and turn it back on. And when Isaac turns it back on, he finds out that the solar array is going to cut them off from the government sector, so he has to rush back using a rocket chair to get there in time. Isaac makes it back to the central hub, and they find a transport that'll bring them to the government sector, but right as they're about to cross, Tideman will cut the tracks from the track and forces them to back up to the Ishimura. Isaac will go through the Ishimura and then use the gravity tethers to pull the tracks back so it can realign it, just long enough so Ellie and Strauss can get across. After this, Isaac will go to use one of the escape pods but sees a hallucination of Nicole, who stops him for a couple seconds before getting into the escape pod. After this, Strauss's mental state worsens to the point of attacking Ellie and gouging out her right eye with a screwdriver. He will then attack Isaac, who is then forced to kill him in self-defense. After this, Ellie helps Isaac get into the government sector using a giant drill they find, but after they arrive, Isaac will trick her to board a shuttle and sends her away, not wanting her to share Nicole's fate. Isaac will then follow the voice of Nicole, but once he gets inside the government sector, he actually opens the door to the sector and then cuts the power, letting the necromorphs inside to distract Tideman's security. The necromorphs gather at the marker site, starting convergence, and then Isaac will have to use a machine to unlock the marker data in his mind. He then kills Tideman, but then is forced to fight off a final hallucination of Nicole, as she was used by the marker to fulfill its wish of completing convergence by merging with its creator Isaac, which leads to a final battle where Isaac must destroy the marker in his hallucination, and once that's complete, he comes out of his hallucination and he sits and he waits to die. As the sprawl will begin, collapsing from the damage caused by the marker, Ellie will fly in and rescue Isaac, and in a post-credit scene, a audio conversation between two EarthGov agents discuss further marker sites, and that's where the game ends and actually starts to set up Dead Space 3. But we'll talk about that game in another video, because that's where Dead Space went off the rails and basically killed the whole franchise. I personally loved the story of Dead Space 2, and I think it's probably one of my favorite games of all time. And before I talk about the next section of the video, I just want to quickly mention that my channel has finally made it into the YouTube Partnership Program, and now I offer exclusive channel memberships for the price of $2.99 a month. which is basically the price of a cup of coffee. With this membership, you can gain a bunch of cool perks that includes a special thanks spot where your name will be added at the bottom of my videos. You'll also get cool emotes for my live streams and the option to get extra content for members only, which I plan on setting up soon once I gain more members. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly mention that, but let's get back to the video. So, leading up to the release, the game would have various leaks and rumors before finally getting announced. Dead Space 2 would be leaked in 2009 in an article of Variety which indicated both a game and a film adaptation, which the film adaptation didn't happen besides for that god-awful 2D, 3D movie, but the game would be officially announced in December of 2009, with gameplay footage being shown at E3 2010 and a demo being shown at Gamescom 2010 that was playable to the people that went and were invited to go. Like I said before, the marketing budget was reportedly at $60 million, and Electronic Arts partnered with the design group Renegade Effects to have them create a real-life version of Isaac's rig suit, which is something I have always wanted. This would become an icon of the series, and the suit was featured at the 2010 San Diego Comic-Con. They would also use the controversial campaign video, this was a video series using the slogan, "Your Mom Hates Dead Space 2", and a group of women were selected based on their conservative attitudes, and they were recorded seeing the more violent parts of the game. A Dead Space themed armor set could be unlocked in Dragon Age 2 with the code released with Dead Space 2. A PS3 exclusive closed beta began on September 23, 2010. Papautis said that the game was in the final stretch of development by October 2010, and a demo was released exclusively for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 on December 8, 2010. But the game would finally be released in January 2011, and I remember when this game was released, I grabbed it on the night of its launch for the PS3. The game released in North America on January 25th, and in Australia it released January 27th, with it being released in Europe on January 28th, and in Germany the game was delayed into February as the country's ratings laws required friendly fire option to be removed from the game, though otherwise its content remained unchanged. In response to a petition due to the disabled players being able to remap the PC controls, Visceral Games developed a patch allowing a full button remapping on the platform. Alongside the standard edition, a limited edition was released along with a collector's edition that included a soundtrack CD, a Unitology themed armor and weapon set, and a concept art lithographs, and the PC and Xbox 360 versions included a replica of the standard plasma cutter, which is another thing I've always wanted. And this also released parallel to Dead Space 2 on the PlayStation Network. The PS3 version also came with a version of the rivet gun from Extraction as an in-game weapon, and having a save file of the first Dead Space unlocked the original plasma cutter as an early bonus weapon. On January 27th, 3 paid DLC packs were released dubbed Hazard, Martial Law, and Supernova, each containing a themed armor and weapon set, and on February 11th a multiplayer contest was held where players fought against a team made up of the staff from the game, with winning earning players new armor sets. The DLC expansion for Dead Space 2 Severed was announced on January 25th, and producer Scott Probst described the DLC as being designed as having a greater action focus, playing into Gabe Weller's profession as a security guard. The DLC is exclusive to the console versions, though Electronic Arts gave no detailed explanation for the lack of a PC release. It was released in March 1st in North America and in Europe, and March 2nd in Australia. A final DLC release came on May 24th with a free edition of multiplayer maps based on the areas of the main game. I forgot to mention this before, but Visceral Games actually held a contest to see who could come up with the best necromorph execution. And the winner actually went to a man named Dan Emerson, who, this is where his NPC character gets killed, but he came up with the meat cello animation, which he did the animation himself, and he actually won the contest and was put in the game. I don't know, I just thought that was really cool because I completely forgot about this contest promotion until as I was getting to this part, so I don't know, I just thought that was pretty cool. People absolutely loved this game on launch, and I think the only thing that was criticized by fans was their focus on action over horror, but I think this game blends both really well. Like the big moment you go onto the Ishimura again after the outbreak has long happened, and being able to explore the old areas, which I thought that was just a perfect send-off to Isaac's character from the first game. And I mean, you get to see him go from feeling like a victim to having this concrete motivation to destroy the marker, and I just think it's just done really well. The ratings for this game did not dip under a 9, which is amazing, and unfortunately is something we won't see again until after the Dead Space remake. People loved the updated movement, the gun variety, and how the guns were actually fun to use and extremely useful, the character development, and Isaac's voice. People loved Isaac's voiceover work, and this is still enjoyed by people to this day. People still love Gunnar Wright as Isaac Clarke. The critics loved that the story was told the same way from Dead Space 1, and you were able to use audio and text logs to kind of piece together what happened. The only thing that people did not like was the multiplayer for the game. Many people felt like it was a shallow attempt to mimic the multiplayer success of other games that were releasing around this time. And it really didn't hold up to any of those games either. It just felt very shallow. The next thing fans love, and is probably the most iconic scene ever, is the needle in the eye scene, where Isaac crawls into the chamber and the player has to guide the needle into Isaac's eye without missing. I think this will forever be the best scene in Dead Space 2, maybe next to like the rocket chair scene where you have to dodge all the debris in space. Besides all that, Dead Space 2 would go on to sell 2 million units, and according to Electronic Arts Chief Financial Officer Eric Brown, the game was outselling the original at a ratio of 2-to-1. In the United States during January, Dead Space 2 was the third best-selling game of the month behind Call of Duty Black Ops and Just Dance 2 for the Wii. The following month, it was still in the top 10 best-selling games, though it fell to 5th place. In the United Kingdom, Dead Space 2 reached the top of the multi-platform sales charts, with the Xbox 360 version seeing the largest share of sales, followed by the PS3 and PC. Speaking in 2017, Wilson said that the game ultimately sold 4 million units worldwide, but the combined marketing and production budget, together with fees to Sony and Microsoft, meant Electronic Arts considered it a commercial failure. Milham and Wannett, speaking in a 2018 retrospective on the series, said it sold similar numbers to the first game while costing more to make. But that's pretty much the release and fan reception for the game. Next, we're going to be talking about the possible remake, yeah. So after the success of the Dead Space remake, the team working on the game, which is now Motive Studios since Visceral was canned following the poor sales after Dead Space 3, the game had gotten the green light before pitches for the remake sequel were denied. The project was eventually put on ice like Dead Space 4, and this caused an uproar in the community because people really loved the remake and thought the franchise was finally back. And this was not a surprising move, as EA only cares about making a profit and not creating a memorable game. Motive Studios was pulled off of the game to work on their Iron Man game and the new Battlefield title. I hate EA more than I hate Bethesda, just because Dead Space is my all-time favorite game, and even I had gotten my hopes up thinking that they were going to continue making remakes, but the idea of seeing another remake is most likely gone for another 5 years, and the thought of me not seeing another Dead Space game release until I'm 30 years old just makes me incredibly sad. I know that section was shorter than normal, but I didn't want to build it up because, I mean, there's little to no information about this. It's just, They got the green light, it was put on ice, and EA crushed everyone's dreams. The end. But let's move on to should you play in 2024. Now, the question of should you play in 2024, of course you should play this game in 2024. 100%. This game is amazing. And unfortunately, you can't get it on the PS5, but it is still playable on the Xbox because of backwards compatibility, and it is totally worth your time. Dead Space 3 might have sucked because of too much action, but Dead Space 2 blends it in really nicely. And if we do end up seeing a remake, it would be a great time for you guys to go back and play this now while you have the chance. Personally, I have gotten 100% on the game, and I have enjoyed every minute spent on this game. I wish I could go back and play it on the PS5, just so I can go back and get all of the achievements again, because that's how much I have enjoyed the game. I don't really have any complaints about it, because in my eyes, it is just the perfect Dead Space game. There is just so many different things that make this game what it is, and I will still love Dead Space 2 no matter how many times I play this game. There's just so many things between the story moments, the gunplay, the necromorphs, the cinematic set pieces, and even the action moments are really well done. Like, I just cannot explain how amazing this game is, and it's a shame that we might not get a remake for it because this game deserves one. I mean, even if it doesn't look like or doesn't feel like it needs one, it would be so nice to see what this game could do with upgraded technology and a nice coat of paint. Like, the Dead Space remake looked absolutely amazing, and people were shocked when that came out. I can't imagine what people would see when this game finally gets a chance to get remade. I'm just one of those people that just really hope Dead Space 4 will happen, but it might be getting my hopes up, and I don't want hopeful gamer syndrome, you know, because that is like, oh, that's getting kicked while you're down. But let's move on into my final thoughts. So even though I hate EA, I really hope they decide to do what is best for the franchise and keep making those remakes and possibly get a finale to the series like the game deserved. It would be nice to finally get closure for this game so we can move on or enjoy the new game they put out the same way we've been enjoying the other Dead Space games since they've been out. Most fans will agree that we need to finally see this game wrap up. We need to see Isaac's story wrap up, and EA just needs to stop wasting our time. And maybe we need to stop wasting our time with EA, because this company is the worst gaming company out there. This company has basically sold their dignity away for a couple of extra bucks. I hope their new Battlefield game does worse than 2042 did, and I hope that we can get Motive Studios back on the Dead Space 2 project, because these guys know how to make a Dead Space game, and that was shown through their passion to make an amazing remake of the first game, and that's what started it all. Motive Studios is a real up-and-coming studio, and it's a shame that they are under the EA umbrella, because they are basically going to get used and abused like Visceral Games did, and they might even get the same Old Yeller treatment that Visceral got. I can just see the cycle starting to repeat, and I just hope for the best for this from this team. And I hope again that someday we'll be able to see another remake from this series, but my hopes again are very low. And that's all I really have to say about that. I just want to say thank you all for watching, and go check out my other videos, because that's how the algorithm works, and if you check out my other videos, maybe YouTube will recommend them to somebody else who enjoys this kind of content. Also, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and don't forget to check out my YouTube membership option. I will put a link down below. Thanks again for watching, guys, and have a good night.